When a ruthless billionaire CEO forced a humble black janitor to crawl like a dog in front of the entire boardroom, he thought he had destroyed her dignity forever, but he had no idea that this single act of cruelty would spark the revenge that would bring down his entire $2 billion empire. If you love shocking tales of power, betrayal, and ultimate justice, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now, because you don't want to miss what happens next. The story begins in a glass fortress towering above the city, a symbol of wealth, arrogance, and unchallenged power, where CEO Richard Halden ruled his empire like a tyrant, a man who believed money gave him the right to humiliate anyone beneath him. And on a cold Monday morning, when the janitors had been called in early to clean after an extravagant party thrown by executives, a middle-aged black woman named Mariah Carter worked silently, scrubbing the marble floor, her hands raw from chemicals, when suddenly Richard entered with his entourage of suited men and women, smirking as he noticed her presence, and in front of them all he sneered, "If you want to stay here, crawl like the dog you are, clean under the table with your back bent like you were born for it." And laughter erupted from the boardroom while Mariah's eyes filled with humiliation, but also something far stronger, an ember of rage that would soon become a wildfire, for Richard had no idea who he had just insulted, no idea of the storm quietly sleeping in the woman he mocked, no idea that within months the same janitor he forced to crawl would dismantle everything he had built and leave him begging on the streets. Mariah did not respond with anger outwardly. She lowered her gaze, swallowed her pride in that moment, and obeyed just enough to make them believe she was broken, crawling under the table as her knees burned against the cold marble, their cruel laughter echoing in her ears. But inside she made a promise that she would never let this humiliation go unanswered, that she would rise above the mockery and strike back with precision so sharp it would cut deeper than any insult. And as she left that day, pushing her cleaning cart back into the service elevator, she whispered to herself, "I will destroy you, Richard Halden." What Richard and his arrogant board didn't know was that Mariah had once been more than just a janitor. Before life twisted her path, she had been a brilliant financial analyst, a woman who studied economics, law, and corporate governance. But after her husband's sudden death and medical bills that drowned her, she had been forced into low-paying jobs just to survive and care for her children, burying her talents under the weight of grief and poverty. Yet those talents never died. They merely slept, waiting for a reason to awaken, and Richard's cruelty was the spark that reawakened them. That night, Mariah sat at her kitchen table in her tiny apartment, her children asleep in the other room, the humiliation replaying in her mind like a poisoned loop. But instead of weeping, she began writing, mapping out every piece of information she knew about Halden's company, from overheard conversations to documents she had glimpsed while cleaning, because janitors see everything, and she remembered every whispered secret, every carelessly discarded paper, every password scribbled on sticky notes left on executive desks, and she realized she had more access to the company's skeletons than any insider, and so began her quiet war. Over weeks she gathered evidence of tax fraud, hidden accounts, illegal mergers, and even personal scandals Richard thought buried, slipping USB drives into her pocket while emptying trash cans, taking photos of documents while polishing desks, listening carefully while they talked carelessly in her presence, dismissing her as invisible, never realizing the invisible woman was turning into their executioner. At the same time, Mariah reached out to an old college friend, Anthony Wallace, now a successful investigative journalist hungry for a story that could topple giants, and she presented him with pieces of the puzzle, careful not to reveal herself at first. But when Anthony realized the depth of what she had, his eyes widened, and he said, "Mariah, this could bring down one of the biggest corporations in the country. Are you sure you want to do this?" And she replied coldly, "He made me crawl like a dog. I'm not just sure, I'm destined to do this." Together they built a strategy. Instead of exposing everything at once, they would leak pieces to the press, regulators, and rival corporations, setting off a chain reaction of suspicion, investigations, and betrayal within Richard's empire, and soon cracks began to form. The first scandal was a leaked video of Richard berating employees, calling them worthless, spreading across social media, igniting protests, employees walking out with signs reading, "We are not dogs," and shareholders demanding answers, but Richard laughed it off, believing he was untouchable. Then came the financial leak, an anonymous whistleblower exposing offshore accounts, tax evasion, and embezzlement of millions, causing federal regulators to launch investigations, freezing assets, and suddenly the empire that once seemed unshakable trembled, while Mariah continued working nights, still cleaning floors as if nothing had changed, hiding in plain sight while secretly pulling strings. But Mariah wasn't done. She uncovered evidence that Richard had bribed politicians, laundered money through shell companies, and even ordered the cover-up of a workplace accident that killed 2 low-level employees. And when Anthony published that exposé, the world turned against Richard, protesters outside his building, investors pulling out, his board turning hostile, whispers of replacing him spreading like wildfire. Richard, paranoid, began suspecting everyone but never once looked at the janitor he had humiliated, who continued scrubbing floors with a quiet smile, watching his empire crumble bit by bit. Then came the ultimate twist. Mariah discovered that Richard's biggest rival corporation was hungry for blood, ready to buy his collapsing empire for scraps, and she positioned herself as the secret bridge, passing information through Anthony until the rival launched a hostile takeover, leaving Richard cornered. Furious, Richard held an emergency meeting, screaming at his board, but they turned on him, voting to oust him as CEO, and he left the boardroom in rage, the same boardroom where he once forced Mariah to crawl, but this time his face was pale with fear, not smug with arrogance. Yet Mariah wasn't finished. She revealed herself in the final blow, sending Richard a private video compilation of every moment of his downfall, ending with the footage of him forcing her to crawl, which she had secretly recorded with her phone that day, and her voiceover saying, "You made me crawl like a dog, but I made you crawl for mercy. Look around you, Richard, everything you built is gone, and I did it." Richard collapsed in his penthouse, the media swarming outside, his name synonymous with corruption, humiliation, and disgrace, while Mariah finally resigned from her janitorial job, walking out of the building with her head held high, her children waiting proudly at the door, for she had not only avenged her dignity but also secured justice for countless workers mistreated under his reign. And as Richard's empire was sold for pennies, as he faced trial, prison, and the loss of all status, Mariah built a new life, funded by book deals, speaking tours, and her own consultancy firm that taught corporations the value of ethics, respect, and humanity, becoming a symbol of resilience and justice worldwide, her name etched into history not as a janitor humiliated but as a warrior who toppled a billionaire. And so the story ends with a lesson written in fire across the ruins of Richard Haldan's empire. That cruelty is never free, that those you think powerless may be the ones who hold your fate in their hands, and that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the deadliest storm waiting to strike, and Mariah Carter was that storm, the janitor who destroyed a $2 billion empire with nothing but intelligence, courage, and the refusal to stay on her knees ever again.